Prisons. Their basic function in society has been cemented since their invention, housing for the wrongdoers of the world. Not only are they responsible for housing these prisoners, but also for their well-being. However, a deeper purpose lies behind prisons. Are they to rehabilitate prisoners or to punish them for their crimes? This is the crux of the debate behind prisons in the 20th and 21st century. Are they to rehabilitate or to punish? To begin to delve into this debate, let us start in the early 20th century. At this time, the prison system was much more about punishment than rehabilitation. In the early 1900s, many prisons were entirely inhospitable. As described by William R. Muth and Tom Gehring in their 1986 article, one New York prison had, quote, changed little since 1825, with appalling cell conditions and, quote, rampant vermin and contagious diseases. Before the movement toward rehabilitation, the focus of most prisons was merely on the punishment of the offender. Muth and Gehring summarized this view with the mission of one particular prison, quote, to punish the criminal and remove him from society for as long as possible. Despite these examples of punishment at the time, a good portion of people supported prison rehabilitation. In as early as 1915, some progressive Americans were already looking to improve not only the general state of prisons, such as physical conditions, but also the functionality of the system as a whole. In the aforementioned article by Muth and Gehring, they described the acts of one such reformer, Thomas Mott Osborne. Osborne based his reformation of the Sing Sing prison on the idea of human dignity by delegating responsibility to prisoners over other prisoners and providing correctional education through a system known as the Mutual Welfare League. Osborne, a prison warden, reflects the stake that prison workers hold in the functional prison system. Prison guards are a crucial component of the prison system, being the only regular human contact that prisoners experience during the extent of their incarceration. Guards and other officials are often seen as the, quote, punishers of inmates. Nevertheless, the rehabilitation of prisons helps to ensure that prisoners are less likely to return to a life of crime after being released. As the years progressed in the 20th century, so did the number of those that supported rehabilitation. The American Prison Association deliberately marked the growing shift toward rehabilitation in 1954 by changing its name to the American Correctional Association. This shift in name shows that even prison officials wanted to get away from the connotations that the word prison gave. Unfortunately, bringing about change in prisons through rehabilitative efforts is easier said than done. According to a 1958 article, the correctional efforts of many prisons at the time were rather ineffectual despite the optimism of the prison officials. This article also mentioned the lack of help integrating released prisoners into society as one of the great impediments towards true rehabilitation. Another article by Richard Singer in 1970 cited a different reason for the failure of prisons to rehabilitate inmates. Singer pointed out the appalling conditions of prisons from the 1800s and 1970s. The physical conditions, violence, and psychological trauma of prisons, Singer claimed, impede the proper rehabilitation of those who must suffer through such inhumane treatment. Singer's use of grotesque descriptions of prison conditions up to the late 20th century emphasizes the need for improvement in this area. Fortunately, the 1960s saw an improvement due to the prisoners' rights movement, a socio-political effort aimed to ensure the basic human rights of those incarcerated. This movement, described by James B. Jacobs, saw a number of reform efforts by the public and led to several Supreme Court cases, such as Cooper v. Pate, which ruled that prisoners have the right to sue to address their grievances. The 1984 article, Work as an Avenue of Prison Reform, acknowledges that during the 1980s, politicians seem to be moving backward, leaning more toward punishment than rehabilitation. This is primarily due to the war on drugs that occurred during the 1980s. Politicians such as Ronald Reagan and others use scare tactics, as shown in this video, to scare the public into a prison system built on punishment more than rehabilitation.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions. They're killing our children.
This backward shift in thinking was also marked by the dramatic increase in America's prison population, which began in the 1980s and continued into the 21st century, as stated by the Sentencing Project in 2013. Nevertheless, the general public still seemed to view rehabilitation within prisons as important, according to a 1989 article. This article also found that prison guards in the 80s held, quote, remarkably high support for rehabilitative ideology, generally preferring to identify as, quote, correctional officers over guards. Despite this favorable disposition toward rehabilitation held by the public, a 2003 article by Enten Benson states that the view of, quote, punishment as prison's main function continued to shape the prison system into the 21st century. Benson uses her status as a member of the American Psychological Association to strengthen her arguments in favor of the beneficial effects of a rehabilitative prison system. And she notes that the punishment-oriented system has failed in that the prison population has grown substantially, while it has had, quote, at most, a modest effect on crime rates. With 26.1 out of every 1,000 Americans becoming victims of violent crime, the continued reformation of prisons and the rising prison population is of great importance to many Americans. The International Center for Prison Studies ranks the U.S. as having the second highest prison population rate in the world. In the 2010 documentary, Learning from Our Mistakes, the Ella Baker Center recognizes the importance of a functional, rehabilitative prison system, not only for the youth offenders, who are especially open to rehabilitation, but also the importance of such a system for the state. Functional rehabilitative efforts cost significantly less to that state than does the incarceration of offenders. This documentary also makes an important point in stating that the point of prisons is to, quote, create fewer victims. In this way, victims and their family hold an important stake in the issue on prisons. Nevertheless, a 2003 PBS article explains the conflicting opinions of victims and their families. For example, Diane Clemens of the group Justice for All points out that, quote, murdered victims have no voice in order to defend their position that prisoners must be punished in order to provide justice to those who have been wronged. Clemens, as well as others in their article, discuss murder victims in order to inspire sympathy in readers and support the victim's right to have the offenders punished. However, such an argument employs the rhetorical either-or fallacy, implying that in order for prisoners to be properly punished, it is impossible to also employ rehabilitative efforts. Similarly, the families of prisoners suffer due to the incarceration of their family members. For example, James Jorgensen, Santo Hernandez, and Robert Warren discuss the negative effect of incarceration on the families of offenders. These authors combine the logical argument of children's decreased test performance due to parental incarceration with an emotional appeal in favor of the children, quote, left behind, in order to argue that the families of prisoners are best served by a functional prison system which rehabilitates inmates. With so many people holding a stake in the quality of the prison system, it is no surprise that modern reformation efforts are still being put in place across the United States. James Gilligan, a professor of law and psychiatry, expressed the redeveloping preference for rehabilitation in his 2012 New York Times article, in which he praises a San Francisco jail, which utilized rehabilitative efforts to reduce both crime within the jail and recidivism rates. According to an article released by the Bureau of Justice Assistance in 2012, many states have reported a reduction in recidivism rates, citing various efforts at rehabilitating rather than merely punishing the prisoners as having caused this reduction.
Although efforts are leaning more towards rehabilitation at the moment, the system is still flawed. Carrie Davis, a former North Point prison guard, explains this.
Most of the times, no. Because you have too many people going in and out. Prison doesn't really, maybe people look at it different because I've been on a different side, but it's not fun. If they feel threatened, not all of them will come to a guard or their caseworker because respect and reputation is a big thing, And if they get that reputation of being scared or being a rat, then their life is very hard.
Now, it seems like the debate on prisons is shifting from reforming prisons and their purpose to actually reforming the prisoners themselves. Only time will tell if these reforms will prove effective.